What's up guys, and welcome back to yet another video. So today what we're doing is we're going to be reading over this message from the founders. It's actually giving us the release date finally for Arc Genesis. For anybody who's not curious about the entire post, which I will be reading through, as well as a couple new meshing patches, the actual release date is February 25th. That is the confirmed and final release date. I know it kind of sucks that they pushed it back a bit, but I'm actually really excited the fact that they did push it back versus just releasing it early, as I'd rather have all the extra patches and updates to go along with it to make sure it's nice and smooth as a first experience going into it, especially with the fact that we had to buy a whole new season pass just to play this thing. Anyways, if you guys did not see, today on the 22nd of January, they sent out a tweet posting to everybody about their new post on the forums. I'm reading over this really fast. They also provided a couple of teaser images, but I'll be going over those a little bit later. Anyway, to start off the post, they said, "A message from the founders. Hello survivors. Jesse and Jeremy here. You know, things have been a bit quiet on Genesis news for the past few weeks. Even though there has been much more to show you, we've been deeply immersed in the pre-release development process. That being said, we're writing today to tell you the final release date for Genesis Part 1 is now February 25th, 2020, simultaneously on all platforms." So this is really good news to everybody on all platforms, as Genesis will be releasing on the exact same date for all platforms, that being Xbox, PS4, and PC. Next up, they said the additional delay will no doubt be a disappointment to everybody who's eagerly awaiting Genesis. We're extremely sorry to push it back an extra month, as we've been heads down with the rest of the team polishing, balancing, and putting the final pieces together. We really felt the extra weight will be worth it, both for the quality of the base game and the ambitious expansion. So what they're pretty much mentioning here is, as I said earlier, they're really pushing it back to make sure they get all the clean patches that they can. They want to make sure the game has as few bugs as possible whenever they release this, which I'm personally all about. I want to make sure that the game has the best initial release as possible, because as a creator, if we go into it and we run into a whole bunch of bugs and glitches, we're going to get very demotivated to continue playing the expansion. And especially since we paid an extra, I think it was $60 for this expansion, we want to make sure that we're enjoying the experience as much as you guys are. So if the devs just forced out this patch really fast and gave us the expansion right now, but it wasn't completely finished and they feel like there's still bugs to be done, then none of us would really be happy. So I'm glad they pushed it back and gave themselves a little bit of extra time to make sure all the patches came out. That being said, they also released a brand new meshing patch, which I'll be going over in just a moment, which is actually amazing. Anyway, back to the post. Next up, they said the live ops team will be taking advantage of the scheduling change by making sure we have a really fun Valentine's event in store for you. Something we originally planned to skip because it followed so closely behind the launch of the new expansion. Plus, we've just released an initial anti-meshing patch, and next week we'll be rolling out a definitive anti-meshing logic overhaul that should fundamentally address all long-standing issues. As we look forward to the success of cross-platform launch of Genesis, all of this makes Arc substantially better for everyone who plays PvP and PvE. Anyway, pretty much what this is talking about is originally they weren't planning on doing a Valentine's event, which I find really interesting. I'm assuming they were not going to do it because they didn't want people first starting out in Genesis to get even more overpowered dinos than they could have initially, but that's just speculation. I don't really know why they weren't going to initially bring it out. Maybe it's just too much work for them to do it, but it sounds like they are planning to have an extra special Valentine's event this year. Normally it's something like a 5x boost to mating, or just adding special mating candies and stuff like that. So hopefully it's something really good. But on the other end of this, they were talking about a new anti-meshing patch, which is actually really cool. One of my friends, Mopa, sent me this message in one of their discords saying, "Not confirmed, but the current patch they just did supposedly made all meshing holes and spots to push you out of the mesh. One guy died to our turrets that way, we think. And when a friend was raiding with a gas bag against a tree base, when he got close to the mesh area / top of the world border, he got dismounted each time. So that might be the way they fixed it." But on top of that, they also mention how now if you mesh bite with a Giga, then you get dismounted in 3 seconds. I'm assuming what they're meaning here is whenever you go to like a bear cave or something, there's always a little chance that somebody could bring a Giga and just try mesh biting through the inside to try to keep you away from the entrance, which is always really annoying if you live inside of a bear cave. But now if you try doing that, you're going to get dismounted within 3 seconds of doing that. So I'm assuming if your body's within the mesh for 3 seconds, then you just instantly get dismounted and left behind. But not only that, he also mentions the fact that on the second time you mount the Giga again while it's still in the mesh, you instantly get killed. So this is some really good news for also mesh biting as well as the whole meshing situation. It sounds like they figured out a way to make sure that you can never leave the mesh. I have not tested this myself, as I'm not sure it really affects single player, but this sounds like it's really awesome, and I honestly can't wait to see how this affects the game. I did go over this a little bit. I will link this down in the description below if you'd like to read up on this a little bit, but a quick run over of it is generally when there's an instance of meshing is caused by bad collision setup, improper level geometry, or a problem with the algorithm used to move the character through the world. In some instances, you place kill kill volumes in locations that you want to guarantee players doesn't end up, but this isn't a global solution. They then also continue to explain how exactly meshing happens, like, in fact, whenever they place a rock in the world, they might rotate it just to make it a little bit different, but it overlaps with another one, and then if you get past one of the rocks, you're just standing on the next one. So that's kind of the basics of how meshing works. With all that said though, they did post a little bit of an article down here about this whole anti-meshing method, how they're trying to implement it, and how they're working on their algorithms to try to detect when players are in the mesh. So what they said here is, under-meshing has been a thorn in the side of both players as well as the enforcement team, and a serious concern for development team. To help mitigate this, we further upgraded our anti-meshing system in order to help the enforcement team track down probable map areas, as well as tracking down people who are breaking our code of conduct. This underlying system has been in place for a while now, gathering useful data, and we've been testing it to make sure that it works reliably. We wanted to make sure that it minimizes the amount of false positives, and we don't flag locations where players can get to during normal gameplay. They kind of show a graph here. I'm assuming this is a graph just showing how many times people get hit by mesh detections, as it says mesh hits over time in the top left corner. What's also interesting is they provide platforms on the top right saying which platforms get the most hits over time. And it's kind of interesting because PC seems to get the least amount of hits out of any platform, and I find that just kind of interesting. It appears that Xbox and PS4 seem to be pretty well neutral, but Xbox hitting a lot more times. Anyway, this doesn't really show us how many times people mesh inside the game. This mostly just tells us how often the system detects somebody being inside of the mesh. So assuming this is accurate, you can feel free to take it as you'd like, but this is really awesome. It's really good to see that they are putting in a new system that might detect a little bit better. Anyway, moving on, it says now the system has been proven to be effective. We've built another layer on top of it to take advantage of this data. I don't want to give specific numbers here because it can only help bad actors try to find new exploits, but I'll explain how the system works. If we detect a player under meshing for a certain amount of time, it will teleport them to a valid position that they were previously at. It will then monitor that player for an amount of time. If the system finds that player under meshing again within that amount of time, or if it's not able to teleport the player to a previous position, then the player will die. Any items being carried will remain at that location. The system is aware of what the character is doing and will take certain actions into account to help prevent the player frustration. The system, whilst in state we're confident will have an impact on limiting meshing, is in the state of ongoing development. We'll continually make improvements and updates, along with rolling out more definitive under meshing resolving changes in the next week. So hopefully you guys understood that. It's pretty basic. Pretty much what they're saying is if you go in the mesh, it'll just calculate how long you're in the mesh. It'll try to figure out if you are actually there, and then it'll try teleporting you away. If you go back in that same area that you were detected as meshing before, then it will instantly kill you. Now, I do have one problem with this, as I know there's several parts of the map that it just kind of teleports you out of the mesh when you're not actually in the mesh. For example, there's a couple areas on Extinction that do this, but if I had to guess, those areas are probably not going to actually count as an instant kill location. However, I will do some testing and try to get back to you guys on that. I'll also make sure to report that to the devs if there are any of those situations. Anyway, with that whole post out of the way, they also gave us 3 teaser images, which I'd like to go over real quick. The first image just being a Modor chasing a Mosa with a couple of players fighting it. Obviously, the Modor has already been released and leaked as a new underwater boss, which you'll have to take underwater tames in order to fight. So it looks like everyone's just using scuba gear and shooting at it with tech rifles, which might be an indication at what strategy you should use. Maybe it's weaker to tech rifles. It's just all kind of speculation right now, but a really cool piece of art. Next up, we have a beautiful image of the Astrocetus, I believe that's how you pronounce it, but I could be wrong, floating around in space with the terrain behind them. This doesn't really tell us too much about these creatures other than the fact that we already know stuff from the devs, such as the fact that they can teleport along with creatures nearby them. So it's going to be essentially like a tech teleporter when you have these tamed. We also get a look at this obelisk looking thing. I'm not really sure what this is an indication of. It might be absolutely nothing at all, but it might also just be telling us how we get to this planet. Nobody's really found out how we get here quite yet. There's speculations that it might be you have to beat a certain boss, or maybe there's just a certain area that teleports you here. Who knows? Be really interested to hear your theories down in the comments below, unless I've missed some kind of post explaining these things already. And last but not least, we get a quick look at this swamp looking terrain. As you can see, we have a Sarco over here, as well as a Bloodstalker. So it appears that these are going to be swamp dwellers. I think we already knew that in the past though. If you don't know what a Bloodstalker is, essentially it's like Spider-Man. You can literally ride it and it swings webs across the map. You can just swing everywhere. It also acts as a grappling hook, so you can grab other tames with it. And it's actually pretty cool. We're going to see how that turns out when the game actually does come out though. However, the one thing I kind of wanted to point out here was the fact that there are pteranodons in this. Initially, when I looked at this, I couldn't really tell if this was going to be some type of underground aberration area, but now that I see these pteranodons, I'm getting the hunch that this might be an actual portion of the map. So if I had to guess, this is probably going to be an outside area. However, one big thing I'd like to point out, if this is an outside area, there's fog. And one thing we all know from the center is fog is the worst. So hopefully the fog's not too bad, and we'll kind of see what this area is is, but it does appear to be very nice looking. I'm sure this is an actual drawn up art and probably not in render, but still, and yeah, it looks amazing. Anyway, guys, that's all I've got for this video. So thank you very much for watching. I hope you enjoyed this. Make sure to leave a like if you did. All the websites will be down in the description below, and make sure you subscribe to the channel if you are new to it, as I get a lot of viewers to this channel who do not subscribe. So I'd really, really appreciate it. Anyway, thanks so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.